Hi, this is Felipe Osorio, and welcome to Second Earth Alternative. So recently I've been tackling with this idea of what happened to humanity in the last 12,000 years. Why did much of civilization suddenly arise, making some of the most magnificent structures around the world? And why did the world's finest civilizations suddenly arise with the ability to write around 3500 BC? What is the reason that the Great Pyramids suddenly declined in their engineering abilities as time went by? We all know about the civilizations that suddenly came about 6,000 years ago. What about Göbekli Tepe, a site in Turkey that is not just as sophisticated as the previous record breakers, the Sumerians? The date of this site actually doubles the age of the Sumerians itself. What happened in between from 6,000 years ago to 12,000 years when the Younger Dryas mini ice age began to melt away? Lastly, was there a catastrophe associated with our history in the last 12,000 years that could account for some of the historical mysteries associated with our past and perhaps previous civilizations like Atlantis? I'm going to be honest, that 6,000 year gap had me stuck for a long time. That is, until last week, when an idea suddenly crept in that seemingly made all the inconsistencies melt away, that made our history suddenly make a lot more sense. I know it's a lot of questions to fill for one episode, but if you're curious what this big theory entails, stay tuned. Okay, so how do we start this episode? Well, perhaps it would be easiest if we go over some of the inconsistencies that make human history so difficult to understand. And I'll try to address each point as concisely and intelligibly as I can as to why I believe what I'm about to explain. Inconsistency 1. The pyramids of the world, some of the world's biggest structures ever built, were built all over the world with similar styles, similar engineering, and yet we still don't know their purpose or function. Inconsistency 2. There is an unusual gap in records of 6,000 years where little to nothing of civilization was discovered, yet somehow around the exact same time, all these cultures, the Olmec, the Sumerians, Old Egypt, they suddenly become civilized, having advanced engineering capabilities as well as linguistic and writing capabilities. Inconsistency 3. All the cultures of the world seem to worship similar deities, dragon-looking creatures. Why? Inconsistency 4. Humans from different cultures, like the ancient Anatolian Turks and the Hopi Indians, completely unconnected to one another, built underground caves to shelter away from a long winter. Inconsistency 5. Why are there so many cataclysms associated with the history of humanity? If you were to look at the Aztecs, for example, there was wind, fire, ice, and water. Basically the four elements that are also being used as descriptions to describe the destruction of humans in human history. So I had been scratching my head for quite some time with some of these questions. For example, no matter how many theories I thought about, one inconsistency that I could never get past was the one related to the 6,000-year-old gap. Then I saw a video with Graham Hancock discussing the Taurate comet field and how the estimated age of the comet that may have struck prior to the end of the Ice Age struck around 12,800 years ago, not 12,500 years ago. The numbers quickly started shifting in my head and then, oh shit! Now I'm not certain that there are bigger astronomical forces at play here, but what I found so interesting was that the new date, 12,800 years, is almost exactly half the age of Earth's axial precession, the time it takes Earth to make one full wobble around itself, as well as the time it takes to make one full cycle between northern and southern passes in relation to the center of the galaxy. Now 12,800 times 2 is 25,600 years. Earth's axial precession equals exactly 25,772 years. Now this date may seem insignificant, except that the last glacial maximum prior to the last ice age occurred somewhere between 27,000 years to 24,000 years ago, which would make it basically in the range of a full precessional axial cycle if you consider the Younger Dryas kind of like the half age or the half cycle. Now consider that for over 6,000 years, humans was mostly living a nomadic tribal lifestyle, completely uncivilized. But why? What is the catalyst that allows a civilization to be down for so long and then suddenly, out of nowhere, start building pyramids? Perhaps there's something bigger at play than we normally assume with traditional theories. And then I remembered the zodiac calendar, comprised of 12 signs, 12 ages that can be easily divided into 4 major segments of 3 ages each. What made me think about the zodiac was this idea that humanity had dark ages and ages of enlightenment, quote unquote, the golden age, according to many legends, including the Mayans. Not to mention, the Mayans based their calendar on Earth's axial precession that to this day has no good answers as to how the ancient Mayan astronomers were able to measure such a long cycle, and then make it the basis for understanding social human behavior and time. There's a modern word for this, it's called astrology. And I'll be honest, I didn't think much of it, or at least the modern interpretation of it. But certainly I found it interesting that the Mayans, some of the world's best noted ancient astronomers, were also some of the biggest astrology believers in antiquity. Now, if you didn't know, the Mayans based much of their calendar not just on Earth's axial precession, but also on orbits of other planets such as Venus. So what gives? Why would these ancient astronomers, who can predict eclipses even to modern times, why did they believe so heartedly on something that I consider to be hocus pocus? Perhaps it's my astrology skepticism that was hocus pocus. But things got really strange when I decided to study the history of the zodiac calendar. Okay, now if you didn't know, and believe me, don't get me wrong, I didn't know this either. The symbols associated with the zodiac calendar dates back to the times of the mammoths, before even the Younger Dryas, somewhere around 17,000 years ago, or at least that's the earliest record that they have. In a cave painting at the Lascaux cave in France, researchers discovered a series of dots that seemed to indicate the exact position of the Pleiades star system, and under it was a bull. Now, if you didn't know, the Pleiades star system resides in a Taurus constellation. Ah, great. Now we have just thrown another inconsistency into the mix. And a very, very interesting question to ponder. Were humans the only ones with this knowledge? Did the last remaining Neanderthals possess similar knowledge? Now, I always believe that the Venus dolls commonly discovered in the Neanderthal lands may actually be Neanderthal based on its anatomy, but we can save that for a different episode. So, now what we do know is that Earth's axial precession may have been known as far back as 17,000 years ago. At least if you assume that the zodiac symbols of the calendar are not just correlated with the stars, but are actually caused by the need to split the precessional age into neat, easy to understand divisions, even as far back as 17,000 years ago. Also, there is some correlation with ice ages if you consider present time as a starting or ending point to the precessional cycle. Now, as you may know, the Mayans had their calendar end in 2012 or maybe even 2016, depending in your interpretation. Now, if we are to try to understand what all of this could mean, we have to go to the root of humanity's knowledge base, which is our creation mythologies. Now, what do our creation myths talk about? Well, many watching this may be aware of the Sumerian term Anunnaki, which translates to those who are descendants from the sky. Also discussed in inscriptions related to the zodiac calendar is the concept as above, so below. The same concept was utilized by the Egyptians when they positioned their pyramids, as Graham Hancock made so famously in his book, to align to the Orion stars. Now, going further with this, the Mayans seem to have done the same thing with their pyramids in Teotihuacan, meaning it seems to have been a prerogative for the ancient astronomers and engineers to connect what was happening in the skies to Earth below. Why look at the skies, an area mostly uninhabitable by humans, as the source for all the knowledge, and the mirror for how we should design colossal structures all around the planet? Could the source of the knowledge itself come from the skies, given this obsession? Well, according to the creation mythologies of many, if not most, world cultures, the knowledge came from the sky gods. And this is where Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson differ from myself in their ideas. Whereas Graham and Randall believe that the inconsistencies can be solved by simply assuming the existence of a highly Atlantean-like civilization that must have existed prior to the Ice Age, I, on the other hand, think that there needs to be an added agent to fully eclipse all the inconsistencies, and it has a lot to do with this channel's logo. Yes, I'm talking about aliens. Now, if you think I'm silly for placing an alien on my emblem, or if you think it's ridiculous to consider that as a front-runner possibility, well, maybe you should talk to aerospace billionaire Robert Bigelow, who works with NASA. Take a look.
And explains the alien looking out from the side of Bigelow Aerospace. It made for the kind of conversation you don't ordinarily have with an accomplished CEO.
Do you believe in aliens?
I'm absolutely convinced. That's all there is to it.
The FAA confirmed to us that for years it referred reports of UFOs and other unexplained phenomena to a company Bigelow owns. He told us he's had his own close encounters, but declined to go into detail.
So why believe in aliens as opposed to another human civilization? Well, this has a lot to do with our religion, as well as the aforementioned inconsistency of why we all worship the same deities. If you backtrack many mythologies, for example, the white Sumerians and the black Dogon people, irregardless of their race and differences in history, it seems that both cultures believed that they had received their knowledge from sky gods. Even more remarkable, the Dogon people actually talked about their gods coming from a specific star system, the Sirius star system, that is also worshipped by the Egyptians. Now, if you didn't follow my previous episode, this is where things get really strange. So another inconsistency we discussed is the Anatolian Turkish people sheltering away in caves that to this day stun archaeologists in its engineering feat, as well as the Hopi Indians. Strangely enough, both cultures talk about a long winter that they had to shelter away from after Earth was destroyed by fire. To clarify this point, I'm going to read the actual passage from the Hopi tradition. Setuknung appeared before those chosen people who still remembered the Creator and his plan, and told them that the doors of the tops of their heads would lead them to safety before he destroyed the world. They followed his indication and took refuge underground with the Ant people, as the first world was destroyed by fire. So according to the Hopi tradition, it was the Ant people who helped them shelter in caves. Now, if you caught my previous episode, you will know that the Hopi word for friend is Naki, whereas the Hopi word for ant is Anu, meaning ant friend directly adds up to the word Anunnaki, the same term the Sumerians gave for their sky gods. And just take a look at the depiction of the ant people in these petroglyphs. Are you starting to see the big picture here? Now, if just for a second you can assume that aliens may have had some kind of dealing in helping humanity survive cataclysms, wouldn't that also settle this huge UFO hysteria question? Why do modern people see grays, for example? Why are Pentagon officials telling us that we're definitely being visited?
Pilots saying something that we can't explain is happening.
That is correct. You're talking about individuals who have very high security clearances. They are trained observers. We've actually paid them and put them through schools to be trained and very keen observers to scrutinize what they're seeing. These are individuals who we trust to fly weapons platforms, sometimes with live munitions, over U.S. cities and to fight and win wars on our behalf. And they're reporting to us that they're seeing something that they can't explain, and it's also being backed up by the video evidence and the radar data and other witnesses.
But I think it's terrifying. I mean, this seems potentially like one of the biggest stories of my lifetime, and I don't care if it's about UFOs or whatever you call it. Something that we don't understand is getting very close to our military aircraft, and the government isn't responding adequately, and I hope you keep sounding the alarm on this.